The sound of metal clanging against metal echoed through the dimly lit gym, a hollow rhythm that seemed to predict the storm that was about to break. On a Tuesday evening thick with humidity and impatience, 3 men prowled near the free weight section, their laughter sharp and mean. They didn't notice the quiet figure in the corner yet, the man who moved with the controlled stillness of someone who had learned discipline the hard way. He was new to the city, new to the gym, and perfectly content to remain unseen. His name was Aaron Walker, though no one here knew it yet. To the other members, he was just another man in worn-in sneakers and a faded t-shirt, stretching in deliberate silence. But beneath that unremarkable exterior lived a history carved by sandstorms, drills, and the unyielding rigor of army training, an identity he had no intention of revealing tonight. Still, the gym had a way of exposing people, not their pasts, but their temperaments. And the 3 men pacing near the dumbbell rack were already revealing far more than they realized. The tallest, Brock, wore arrogance like a second skin. His friends, Jace and Miller, orbited him with the eager obedience of men who found comfort in shared cruelty. They hunted weakness the way others hunted progress, and tonight their eyes drifted toward new prey. It began as a whisper of annoyance. A scoff when Aaron chose a bench near theirs. A muttered insult when he wiped it down carefully before setting his weights. Brock rolled his shoulders, cracking his neck with theatrical irritation, as though the simple presence of a quiet stranger offended the order of his world. Aaron heard every sound, every derisive breath, but his face stayed calm, unreadable. Observation had always been his first weapon, and patience his second. The gym's fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the worn rubber flooring. Aaron felt the tension thickening, felt the shift in the room's energy the way a soldier feels the distant tremor of an approaching conflict. He didn't want trouble. He hadn't come here to prove anything to anyone. After years of service, after losing brothers in places the world quickly forgot, he had learned that battles you can walk away from are the victories that matter most. But the universe often tests the vows we make to ourselves. And gym bullies, Aaron knew, were rarely satisfied with subtle intimidation. Brock stepped closer, dropping a dumbbell with a deliberate thud meant to claim territory. Jace smirked, waiting. Miller crossed his arms, amused. Aaron continued his set, slow and controlled, refusing to give them the reaction they sought. Yet already, a thin thread of inevitability wound itself through the moment, pulling the scene toward confrontation. To an outsider, nothing dramatic had happened yet, just men sharing cramped space and swollen egos. But the air was thick with the kind of bravado that carries consequences. Aaron sensed their intentions not through words, but through posture, proximity, the shift of weight on impatient feet. Soldiers learn to read rooms the way others read weather. And tonight, the storm clouds were gathering, silent and sure, ready to break over something that should have been ordinary. Brock took the final step, the one that crossed the threshold between irritation and aggression. He nudged the barbell just as Aaron reached for it, forcing a stumble that never fully materialized. Aaron's reflexes corrected instantly, gracefully. Brock's eyebrows twitched in surprise. He had expected fluster, maybe fear. Instead, the quiet man simply steadied the weight, looked at him once, and resumed his lift. That restraint, that calm, only fueled Brock's need to dominate the moment. Jace let out a laugh that echoed too loudly in the half-empty gym, drawing glances that quickly retreated. People sensed conflict brewing but chose the safety of indifference. Aaron felt their avoidance like a familiar ache. In war, you learn that most people hope danger will pass them by if they simply refuse to see it. But Aaron had stopped believing in that kind of wishful blindness long ago. Tonight, he stood alone, and that was enough. Still, he tried once more to defuse the moment. He set the weights down gently, nodded toward the open space nearby, and offered a simple gesture inviting them to continue whatever routine they claimed to own. A peace offering, small but sincere. Brock sneered at it, misreading courtesy as cowardice. Some men only understood dominance in the language of force, and Brock was fluent. He stepped closer, invading Aaron's space, unaware he was stepping across an invisible line drawn by fate. Aaron didn't move at first. He let the nearness settle, let the tension coil like a wire pulled too tight. His breathing slowed, steady, the practiced rhythm of someone who had stood inches away from far greater threats than a bully with an inflated ego. He could feel Brock's intention before the man even acted, a subtle shift in weight, a tightening of the jaw, the instinctive preparation for a shove meant to humiliate. But humiliation was a currency Aaron no longer accepted. Before Brock's hand could rise, before the moment could erupt into something irreversible, Aaron spoke, his voice calm enough to unsettle. He told Brock he didn't want trouble, that the gym belonged to everyone, that no one needed to prove anything tonight. Simple words, steady words, the kind designed to give a man a chance to choose a better path. But Brock wasn't listening. He heard only challenge in kindness, only threat in the quiet strength of a man he couldn't intimidate. The other two shifted behind him, forming a loose semicircle, their shadows overlapping like closing jaws. And though Aaron kept his posture relaxed, an old instinct flickered awake in him, uncoiling like a soldier rolling quietly from sleep. He didn't want to fight. But he knew, down to the bone, that one was coming. And the gym, with noise, felt small as the moment tightened, waiting for the spark that would decide everything. The moment the tension finally snapped, it did so not with a shout, but with a simple, deliberate push. Brock's hand struck Aaron's shoulder with a force meant to unbalance, to test, to humiliate. But Aaron didn't stumble. His feet grounded instinctively, his balance instant and automatic, years of drills encoded in muscle memory. The push might as well have landed on a stone pillar. Brock blinked, thrown off not by impact, but by the complete absence of reaction. Aaron simply stepped back to reclaim his space, his expression unreadable, his body calm in a way that felt unnatural to men who lived on impulse. Jace let out a low whistle. Miller muttered something crude. Brock's jaw tightened, embarrassment simmering beneath his skin like a burn. He wasn't used to resistance. He wasn't used to silence, either. Silence, from his perspective, was an act of defiance. And defiance, especially from someone he had already decided was weak, was intolerable. Aaron sensed the shift, the unmistakable moment when a man chooses not just aggression but escalation. He had seen it in villages reduced to rubble, in tense negotiations that crumbled into firefights. That subtle narrowing of the eyes, the clench of fists, the forward lean of a man whose pride had become more dangerous than any physical strike. Aaron inhaled deeply, centering himself. He didn't want this. The gym was supposed to be a place of rebuilding, a sanctuary where he could relearn who he was after years of being shaped by the military's relentless demands. But the world rarely aligns itself with one man's quiet intentions. Brock stepped in again, invading his space until their chests nearly brushed. "You got a problem, old man," he said, though Aaron wasn't much older. But bullies often aged their targets with words meant to diminish. Aaron held Brock's gaze, not defiantly but steadily, as if assessing a threat from a detached vantage point. He told him, evenly, that he didn't want conflict, that there was still time to walk away. The words weren't sharp or emotional, they were factual, almost gentle. And that gentleness mocked Brock more effectively than any shouted insult could. Jace snickered. Miller cracked his knuckles. Around them, the gym seemed to fold inward, the clanging of weights fading into a distant backdrop beneath the heavy thrum of impending violence. A few people glanced over again, uneasy but unwilling to interfere. The staff pretended not to notice. This kind of conflict had a way of slipping through the cracks of collective responsibility. Brock shoved him again, harder this time. The blow landed squarely on Aaron's chest, but it was Brock who stumbled a half-step forward as Aaron absorbed the force. The imbalance exposed him, left his core open, revealed flaws in his posture he didn't even know he had. Aaron saw them all instantly. Soldiers are trained to recognize vulnerabilities as naturally as breathing. And in that split second, Aaron understood that Brock wasn't dangerous, he was reckless. Recklessness gets men hurt. Still, Aaron refused to fight. He stepped back, raising his hand slightly, palms open, the universal signal of peace. But to Brock, open palms read like an invitation. With a growl, he reached for Aaron's shirt, fingers hooking into the fabric as he yanked him forward. It was a mistake, a small one, but enough to topple the balance of control. In one seamless motion, Aaron disengaged. He pivoted, breaking Brock's grip without aggression, without even a visible strike. A simple redirection. A transfer of energy from conflict into neutrality. It was something army instructors drilled into recruits until it became instinct. Move with your opponent, not against him. Use momentum, don't fight it. Brock stumbled sideways, thrown off by the lack of resistance. He regained his footing, cheeks reddening with humiliation. His friends looked on, their amusement fading into something more uncertain. Aaron didn't advance. He didn't gloat. He didn't even speak. He simply waited, steady as a fortress, hoping, quietly, desperately, that Brock would choose dignity over escalation. But dignity rarely survives bruised pride. Brock lunged. It wasn't a trained strike. It wasn't even coordinated. It was pure instinct, wild, clumsy, desperate. The kind of attack born from a man who didn't know how to lose control without flailing. Aaron's body responded before his mind consciously processed the motion. His stance shifted. His shoulders angled. His breath slowed. Time stretched, thinning into the narrow space between decision and consequence. He sidestepped, allowing Brock's momentum to carry him forward. With a controlled motion, Aaron placed one hand on Brock's shoulder, guiding him past, turning what could have been a violent collision into a harmless misstep. But Brock, unable to accept the ease with which he was redirected, swung again, this time catching air as Aaron ducked. Miller cursed under his breath. Jace muttered that something wasn't right. They had expected a timid man, maybe a frightened one. What they found instead was someone who moved like water, soft, fluid, impossible to grasp. Still, Aaron didn't strike. Not once. But restraint, to men like Brock, is indistinguishable from mockery. So when he lunged a third time, wild, furious, Jace joined in, grabbing Aaron's arm. Miller circled behind, cutting off retreat. A 3-on-1. A trap closing like steel jaws. And finally, Aaron understood. This wasn't a moment he could walk away from. Not anymore. Not with 3 men committed to violence and no bystander willing to intervene. The calculus shifted. Risks redefined themselves. Safety, his own and theirs, depended on precision, on control, on the kind of measured strength Aaron had hoped to leave behind with his uniform. His eyes sharpened. His posture changed. And a quiet inevitability settled over the scene as the storm he had tried so hard to avoid at last broke open around him. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to 3 shadows closing in. The gym's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their cold glow washing across sweat-slick floors and the tense geometry of bodies preparing to clash. Aaron stood at the center of it, breathing slow, steady, controlled, not because he lacked fear, but because he had spent years learning that fear could be shaped into clarity. Jace's grip tightened around his right arm while Brock circled to the front, fury pulsing at his temples. Miller hovered behind, eager, restless, anticipating the moment the quiet stranger would finally break. But Aaron did not break. He assessed. Jace's stance was unstable, weight on his heels, shoulders too far back. Brock's arms were wide, telegraphing his intention to tackle rather than strike. Miller stayed low, knees bent, waiting for an opportunity that hadn't yet revealed itself. To most people, it would have looked like chaos. To Aaron, it was a map. And every flaw was a route to de-escalation. Still, he tried a final time to choose peace. "Let go," Aaron said softly, his voice almost drowned by the clanging of a nearby barbell. "Nobody needs to get hurt." Jace laughed, mistaking composure for weakness. Brock spat a curse. Miller muttered, "Should have thought of that earlier." And the decision, the collective, dangerous choice, was made for Aaron. Their hostility crossed a threshold he could no longer counter with words. When Jace pulled harder on Aaron's arm, Aaron responded with a movement so fluid it appeared involuntary. He pivoted, stepping across Jace's centerline, guiding the man's momentum into a harmless stumble. His arm twisted free with a smooth rotation learned years ago in hand-to-hand training. Jace's balance collapsed. He flailed, catching himself on a nearby bench. Brock surged forward, misreading the stumble as an opening. He swung. A wild right hook. Too wide. Too slow. Aaron leaned back just enough for the fist to pass by, a whisper of displaced air brushing his cheek. Before Brock could reset his footing, Aaron placed a firm palm on his chest and redirected the man sideways. No strike, no violence, just controlled leverage. The movement sent Brock staggering into a rack of dumbbells, metal clanking loudly as he collided with it. Startled gasps scattered across the room. People were watching now. But no one stepped in. Aaron didn't advance. He didn't retaliate. He stood with his hands open, grounding himself in the discipline that had kept him alive through darker moments than this. But Miller, seeing Brock fall, mistook restraint for vulnerability. He lunged from behind. Aaron felt the shift in the air before the attack fully materialized, the soft thud of hurried footsteps, the exhalation before impact. He lowered himself just as Miller attempted to grab him around the waist. Aaron rotated, turning sideways, lifting Miller's arm with a gentle but firm grip. Using the man's momentum, he redirected him to the floor. Miller didn't crash. He landed with surprising softness, guided rather than thrown. Aaron stepped back, breath steady. But the three men weren't deterred. They were humiliated. Humiliation, Aaron knew, was far more volatile than anger. Brock recovered first. His face was red, flushed with indignation. "You think you're funny," he growled, wiping sweat from his brow. "Some kind of karate freak?" Aaron didn't respond. Words wouldn't help now. They'd only deepen Brock's desperation to reclaim control. Jace rose unsteadily from the bench, rubbing his shoulder, eyes narrowed. The clownish bravado he'd worn earlier had cracked, revealing something sharper, an insecurity that demanded validation, no matter the cost. Miller pushed himself to his feet with a groan, glaring at Aaron as though the gentle takedown had been a personal insult rather than an act of mercy. The three of them regrouped. A triangle. A trap. Their expressions no longer held amusement, only wounded pride and the determination to crush whatever had challenged it. Aaron exhaled slowly, letting the breath anchor him. His heart didn't race. His hands didn't shake. The discipline drilled into him through endless combat simulations settled like a shield across his thoughts. "Last warning," Aaron said quietly. "Walk away." Brock laughed, but the sound lacked power now. "Make me." When they attacked this time, they did so together. Jace lunged first, aiming low. Miller followed from the side, arms raised to grapple. Brock came from the front, teeth clenched, going for brute force over strategy. It was an uncoordinated assault, but the numbers still made it dangerous. The gym erupted around them, weights dropping, sneakers scraping, a few panicked voices calling out half-heartedly for someone to stop the fight. But Aaron wasn't fighting. He was surviving. He stepped sideways, redirecting Jace's dive with a downward sweep of his forearm. The motion sent Jace sliding harmlessly across the padded floor. Before Miller could clamp onto him, Aaron shifted his weight, pivoting with precise economy. He trapped Miller's wrist, rotated, and guided him into a controlled kneel. Miller's breath burst out in surprise, not pain. Brock charged. This time, Aaron could not avoid direct impact. Brock's shoulder slammed into his ribs, pushing him back several steps. Pain flared, sharp and hot. But Aaron remained upright. Training steadied him. He placed his forearm across Brock's collarbone, not striking, just halting his advance, and pushed him back with measured force. Brock stumbled, caught himself, roared in frustration. The room fell into stunned silence. People weren't sure what they were witnessing. Aaron wasn't attacking. He wasn't even angry. He moved with a precision that was almost serene, a calm so profound it unnerved even the bystanders. Jace got up again, panting now, the edges of fear creeping into his expression. Miller's confidence evaporated entirely. He hovered near the dumbbells, reconsidering every choice that had led him to this moment. But Brock only grew more furious, consumed by the need to reclaim dominance. He grabbed a 25-pound plate. A collective gasp spread across the gym. Aaron's chest tightened, not with fear, but with sorrow. This was the point of no return. A weight plate wasn't just reckless, it was lethal. Even Brock sensed the hesitation around him, but pride drove him forward. He raised the plate, fury burning like wildfire. Aaron stepped in. Fast. Decisive. A wrist grab. A twist. A disarm trained into muscle memory. The plate clattered harmlessly to the floor, rolling in a slow arc before coming to rest beside a treadmill. Brock staggered back, shocked. Aaron didn't strike him. He simply held the man's forearm in a firm, immovable grip, a silent reminder of the line that should never have been crossed. And in the stillness that followed, something shifted. Not in Aaron. In them. Brock's bravado cracked. Jace stared at the floor, shaken. Miller backed away entirely, breath shallow. The storm that had raged inside the gym seemed to lose its thunder, replaced by a thick, stunned quiet. And into that quiet, another kind of tension emerged, one that had nothing to do with fighting. It was the tension of realization. They were no longer facing a stranger. They were facing someone trained, deeply, purposefully, to protect and restrain. Someone who had chosen mercy over domination at every turn. And that realization would soon unravel everything they thought they knew about strength, violence, and consequences. The realization hit the three men like a slow-moving shockwave, first confusion, then disbelief, and finally a creeping dread that settled beneath their skin. Brock stood frozen, his forearm still pinned gently but immovably in Aaron's grasp. It wasn't pain that held him captive, it was the unmistakable truth in the stranger's controlled strength. Aaron wasn't reacting with adrenaline-fueled chaos. He wasn't striking. He wasn't even breathing hard. His restraint was deliberate, practiced, dangerous in its precision. Brock pulled once, twice, but his arm remained locked in place by a man who seemed carved from stillness itself. Aaron released him. The absence of contact was almost more unsettling than the grip had been. Brock stumbled back a step, rubbing his wrist with trembling fingers, eyes darting between Aaron and his friends. Jace swallowed hard. Miller looked ready to bolt. But something in their pride, some deformed sense of loyalty or fear of humiliation, kept them from fleeing outright. Aaron stood tall but relaxed, his hands lowered, his gaze steady. He wasn't challenging them. He wasn't threatening them. He was offering them an exit, unspoken yet unmistakable. For a heartbeat, it seemed they might take it. But shame is a stubborn force. Brock's breath hitched, and his expression hardened again. Not with confidence, those flames had burned out, but with desperation. His life had been built on the illusion that strength equaled dominance, that fear equaled respect. And if he walked away now, in front of his friends, in front of everyone watching, the illusion shattered forever. He couldn't let that happen. He straightened his shoulders. "What are you?" he demanded, voice low, shaky. "Some kind of fighter." Aaron didn't answer. Not because he wanted to hide who he was, but because the truth would only widen the gap between them. He had no desire to posture. No desire to claim superiority. His silence felt like judgment to Brock, though it was anything but. Jace stepped in beside Brock, rubbing the sore muscle at his shoulder. "Man, something's off," he murmured. "Nobody moves like that unless—" "Shut up," Brock snapped, though the quiver in his voice betrayed him. Miller took a cautious step backward, glancing toward the exit as though the door had suddenly become a lifeline. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Maybe we should just drop it. This isn't." But Brock refused to be the one who backed down first. He wasn't ready to face the truth that someone he had judged as weak, dismissed, mocked, provoked, had dismantled their attacks without so much as a punch. The imbalance gnawed at him. And instead of stepping away, he took another step forward. "You think you're better than us," he hissed. Aaron exhaled slowly, not in frustration but in disappointment. He had hoped the point had already been made. He had hoped that mercy spoken through movement would be enough. A cluster of gym-goers gathered near the wall, phones in hand, recording with the hesitant fascination of people who want to witness action but not consequences. Their eyes flicked between the men, unsure whether they were watching the end of a conflict or the beginning of something far more dangerous. Aaron scanned their faces, reading fear, curiosity, and helplessness. This wasn't the environment he wanted shaping the next decision. Violence, even restrained, had a way of rippling outward. And he needed this to end before the ripples reached anyone else. "Brock," Aaron said at last, his tone soft but unwavering. "This stops now. Walk away. All three of you." It was the first time Aaron had spoken Brock's name. The recognition startled the man, though he tried to hide it. "Don't tell me what to do," Brock snapped, but the fire behind his words was dying. Aaron stepped slightly to the side, no longer blocking any path, no longer anchoring the moment in confrontation. He positioned himself as an exit rather than an obstacle. "It's your choice," he said. The simplicity of those words hit Brock harder than any strike could have. They put the responsibility squarely on him, illuminated the truth he had been avoiding. Nothing forced him to escalate this but his own wounded ego. For a flicker of a second, Brock seemed on the verge of stepping away. But the moment shattered when Jace, trying to salvage his own pride, shoved a hand against Brock's back. Not aggressively, encouragingly. "Come on, man. Don't let him punk you." Brock stiffened. Miller looked between them, horror creeping into his eyes as he realized the cycle was beginning again, not because they wanted a fight, but because they didn't know how to back down without losing face. Aaron closed his eyes briefly, a gesture of weary resignation. He opened them just as Brock swung. This time, Brock didn't hold back. His strike was fueled not by anger, but by the desperate need to erase humiliation. It was stronger, faster, but still untrained. Aaron stepped off the line of attack, redirecting Brock's wrist with a gentle parry. The punch passed by harmlessly. Jace lunged next, but Aaron sidestepped, guiding him past with a forearm placed carefully against his shoulder blade, turning the motion into a near stumble. Miller hovered at the edge, unable to commit, unable to retreat. Aaron's movements grew tighter, more efficient. Every motion was a message. Stop. Pause. Rethink. But they didn't understand the language. At last, Aaron realized something crucial, not about them, but about himself. He couldn't end this with simple redirection. Not anymore. They were trapped in a loop, repeating attacks until one of them got lucky or one of them got seriously hurt. The situation required something clearer, something decisive yet controlled. When Brock charged again, Aaron met him halfway. He caught Brock's forearm, pivoted, positioned his elbow, applied controlled pressure. Not enough to break anything, but enough to force Brock to the ground in a kneel that felt involuntary, primal, humbling. A kneel that echoed submission without cruelty. Brock gasped, more from shock than pain. Jace froze. Miller stepped back so quickly he nearly tripped. The room went silent. Aaron leaned close, voice barely above a whisper, meant only for Brock, a final offering of dignity. "I'm not your enemy. But you need to stop." He released him. Brock didn't rise right away. His pride had finally cracked open enough for truth to seep in. And then, from the back of the gym, a voice broke the silence. "Sir, are you Army?" The question sliced through the room with startling clarity. Aaron turned. A young man stood near the treadmills, chest heaving from a paused run, eyes bright with recognition. He wore a military PT shirt. His expression was not reverent, but knowing. Aaron said nothing. He didn't have to. The three bullies understood instantly. They had never stood a chance, not because Aaron was stronger, but because he was trained to end violence without inflicting unnecessary harm. Trained to protect others, even those trying to hurt him. Trained to be a force of restraint rather than brutality. And now the truth stood exposed in the quiet aftermath, heavy as the weight scattered across the floor. For the first time that night, Brock looked genuinely afraid, not of Aaron, but of himself. Of what he had almost caused. Of how badly this could have ended if the quiet stranger before him had been anyone else. The revelation wasn't explosive. It was solemn. And its consequences were only beginning to unfold. The gym felt different in the aftermath. Not quieter, not louder, but sharper, as though every breath taken inside its walls carried the weight of what had just happened. Brock remained on one knee, chest heaving, the realization settling into him like cold rain. Jace stood rigid beside a rack of weights, unsure whether to run or apologize. Miller hovered near the exit, pale and trembling, his bravado washed away entirely. And Aaron, still composed, still breathing in that calm, measured rhythm, watched them with an expression that held no triumph, no arrogance. Only sadness. The young man in the PT shirt approached with cautious respect, hands raised slightly as if entering sacred ground. "Sir," he said more quietly now, voice steadying. "I'm assuming Army. Infantry at least. Maybe Rangers." His eyes flicked across Aaron's stance, his posture, the precision of his earlier movements. "Sir, nobody moves like that unless they've done serious training." Aaron shook his head gently, not denying it but not claiming it either. He didn't want admiration any more than he'd wanted conflict. Identity, to him, was personal, shaped by sacrifice, not spectacle. But Brock saw the exchange. The dawning clarity was almost painful to witness. His eyes widened in a way that suggested the pieces had finally snapped together. The calm, the control, the effortless redirections, The mercy. He had been fighting, not a random stranger, not an easy mark, but someone who had faced real battles, someone who lived through training that broke lesser men, someone who knew the anatomy of violence and chose restraint anyway. Brock rose slowly to his feet. Not in defiance now, but in uncertainty. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Why didn't you hit me?" The question silenced even the spectators who had lingered with their phones half raised. Aaron regarded Brock with a level gaze. "Because you didn't need to be hurt," he said simply. "You needed to stop." Jace swallowed. Miller's shoulders slumped. Those words slipped into their chests like truth they had spent years avoiding. Strength wasn't dominance. Power wasn't intimidation. And winning, real winning, rarely looked like the fantasies they'd built their egos upon. Brock blinked hard, as though fighting back something he didn't know how to name. Shame. Gratitude. Confusion. Perhaps all three. He took a step forward, but Aaron mirrored it backward, offering space instead of confrontation. "I could have seriously hurt you," Brock murmured, more realization than threat. Aaron nodded. "Yes. And I could have hurt you." He let the meaning sink in. "But we're all standing here. That's the part that matters." It was not forgiveness, not yet. But it was truth. Stronger than accusation. Stronger than pride. A staff member finally approached, nervously wringing her hands. She had watched the incident unfold, unsure whether to intervene. "Do I need to call security?" she asked tentatively, eyes darting between the men. Aaron shook his head. "It's handled." Brock flinched at the word. Handled. Not by him. By the man he had misjudged so completely. Miller stepped forward first, voice trembling. "Look, I shouldn't, I didn't." But the apology fell apart before the first full sentence. Words were flimsy tools for a moment like this. Jace attempted his own version, rubbing the back of his neck. "We messed up, man. We just thought you were—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. They had thought Aaron was weak. Easy. A man to push because pushing others felt like power. Brock stood silently, wrestling with his own apology, with the part of himself that didn't know how to form it. His jaw flexed. His brows tightened. Finally, he exhaled through his nose, a shaky, dislodged breath. "I was wrong." The words dropped heavily, like weights settling into place. "I was way out of line." Aaron studied him for a long moment. Most men would have gloated. Most men would have seized the opportunity to flex superiority. But Aaron didn't believe in victories born from someone else's humiliation. His voice softened. "It doesn't have to define you." Brock blinked, startled. He expected condemnation. He received compassion. "You walk the path you choose," Aaron continued. "Tonight you almost chose something that would have changed your life forever. But almost isn't fate. Not unless you keep repeating it." The gym seemed to lean in, listening. Brock's shoulders sagged. "I don't want to be that guy anymore." "Then don't," Aaron said. Simple. Heavy. True. The young man in the PT shirt nodded approvingly. "He's right. You turned a bad moment into a chance to grow. Most people don't get that kind of mirror." Jace and Miller exchanged glances that were no longer forged from shared cruelty but from shared reckoning. The two stepped beside Brock, mirroring his posture, not as followers but as men ready to shoulder accountability. "Sorry," Miller said again, this time steady. Jace echoed it moments later. Brock, finally, found his voice. "For real. I'm sorry." Aaron accepted their apologies with a nod, not because the words healed everything, but because forgiveness is a starting point, not an ending. A staff member exhaled in relief. The watchers lowered their phones, some looking ashamed for having recorded, others relieved that the scene had resolved without violence. The room returned slowly to its natural rhythm, the clatter of weights, the hum of treadmills, the faint music overhead. But the energy had changed. People glanced at Aaron with a mixture of respect and curiosity, though he didn't seek either. He simply returned to his spot, picked up his towel, and wiped the bench before resuming his quiet routine. As though the storm he had weathered was nothing more than a passing disturbance in a life filled with far heavier tempests. Brock approached once more, cautiously. "If you ever need a spot or something," he murmured awkwardly. "I mean, I owe you one. Aaron offered a faint smile. Just pay it forward. Brock paused, then nodded. Perhaps for the first time in years, he understood what strength really looked like, and it wasn't a clenched fist. Jace nudged Miller and whispered, "Man, we got schooled by a ghost." But there was admiration beneath the humor now. Respect threaded into the words like a new beginning. When the three left the gym, quieter, humbler, changed, the air seemed to lift with them. Aaron finished his set, feeling the tremor of memory in his muscles. He thought of the soldiers he had trained beside, of the battles he had survived, of the vow he had made to use his strength for protection, not dominance. Tonight, that vow held. Tonight, he had chosen restraint over retaliation, mercy over fury. And because of that choice, three men walked out with their dignity intact and their futures unbroken. As he exited the gym minutes later, the sky outside was settling into dusk. The air was cool, edged with the scent of distant rain. Aaron paused beneath the fading light, letting the quiet settle across him. A long breath. A slow exhale. Storm over. He walked toward the parking lot with the steady, grounded steps of a man who no longer ran from conflict, but no longer sought it either. He had nothing to prove, nothing to display. His strength wasn't in how he fought, but in how he chose not to. Behind him, through the gym windows, he saw Brock speaking earnestly to Jace and Miller, their expressions reflective, chastened, human. A small nod passed between them. A seed planted. Aaron smiled. Sometimes the greatest victories are the ones no one sees. Sometimes the strongest men are the ones who lift others, not weights, not fists, but choices. And sometimes the battles that matter most are the ones we walk away from, leaving behind not broken bodies, but changed hearts.